faster than the first one that still hasn't arrived.
Boy,
So
I'm just going out on YouTube right now, so
okay.
I'll greet our YouTube folks in a moment. Um, Good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock in the East. Do you know where your children are? Uh, I crack myself up.
That's
We used to say that all the time, or there was a radio program that used to say that all the time.
yeah. It's like it's 10 o'clock at night. Do you know where your children are? It's like
Right. Okay. Well, I haven't had great success with my shipping to Europe, unfortunately. Um, my shipment to Roberta Harvey came back to me.
oh no,
Yeah,
those are expensive too.
yeah. So, yeah, really expensive.
Yeah, I remember when I first self-published, um, a third of a third of the decks went to Australia, and a third of them went to Spain and France and England. And I had built in like you know $7 for shipping, and they were all like $76.
Yeah.
Like, oh my lord! So I made $2 in the whole thing because of all the shipping took all the profits.
Oh boy. So you profited by $2 worth?
Yeah, I spent I spent $1,500 for 125, and that included box, little book, and the deck shrink wrapped, just a whole and the little lanyard fold out I had, and I ended up making $1,502, maybe even a couple of pennies. It's like it's
Well,
you know
what I have known over the years is that my publications have not paid off, and I've uh, published 4 books, and very few people have read them.
even on the mass market publication version, that I didn't have to pay a dime for. I think I make between 16 and $60 every 6 months ish. And this last 6 months royalty period, I made zero. I mean, so it's like,
Yep, it's pig in a poke.
yeah, I now I just write it off as marketing. It's
Yeah.
not revenue, it's marketing.
How are things going in Taos generally?
Uh, really well. Tourism is down. We've got this big construction project that is just languished. Um, but it's spring now. Yesterday was a little too windy for work, but uh,
Mhm.
spring has sprung. Not sure if it's a fake spring or a real spring, but we've got the wind. It was upwards of 70 miles an hour one day last week, I think. Um,
Mhm.
but today it's going to be lower, probably only top about 15 to 18 miles an hour. Um, Around 4 o'clock, it should be 5 to 10, so it should be good for work today. But it's sunny and dry and dry and dry, and
Hmm.
had a small surprise.
Well, you should have a decent Easter week, I would guess.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hope.
yeah. There was the spring break week, and it wasn't as busy um, as normal. So stuff is it's slower. We had a slow last year, and this year seems to be picking up, but obviously no word yet. I wouldn't put my money on black or red. I just watch.
Yeah. Well, who knows what the future may bring.
Right.
Um,
But
it's
it, it's beautiful.
hmm.
I'll tell you that. I mean, spring here is. I've never loved spring more.
Yeah. So let's go on here. So we're into volume 2 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. And as I say, it's volume 2. And this was first published in 2018. And so a lot of water has gone over the dam since it was published, and yet it seems very fresh, because what is the title of this essay? This is an essay by a man named David Tacey, who is Australian, I believe, entitled "The Return of the Sacred in an Age of Terror." And there's a quote from Jung before the beginning of the essay: "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. The world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves." And oh my God.
Well, I wrote in the book under that after you make shame walk the plank, be both and stop repressing. I mean,
Yeah,
you don't need to share it all, and at the same time, don't be embarrassed about the contents. I mean, they just are
yeah,
what they are. I think there's just an
right.
isness that I think there's actually just an isness that in the modern world doesn't really reflect Debbie's concept of the inclusive other. And I think it's important. When I have the urge to judge, I'm now first judging that urge. I mean, is it kind? Is it beneficial? Or is it worthwhile? And if not, I'm trying to keep my mouth shut. I mean, it's just so much juvenile squabbling and finger pointing. And so where's the substance? I mean, it's interesting to me. I just keep that whole concept of the other keeps coming in, because I try to live by both and instead of either or. And
Yeah,
I realize that I can't expect anybody else to have that. Because perception and opinion is not perspective. And I think perception and opinion are both important. I mean, because it kind of opinion and perception is your personal perspective. So I kind of personal unconscious, collective unconscious. Just a lot of.
well, I think there's a lot to watch right now.
Yeah.
And so let me read into this a little bit, and because it has some relevance to our world today. First paragraph. Jung's Red Book throws much light on the situation of the sacred in postmodern times. When the sacred returns, it causes disruption to social and personal order. On January 20th, 1914, Jung's soul arises from the depths and asks him if he will accept war, destruction, and mayhem. His soul shows him images of military weapons, human remains, sunken ships, and destroyed states. Jung struggles to integrate these images and says he could not conceive of the extent of what was to come. Quote, "I felt the burden of the most terrible work of the times ahead," unquote. The soul would bring the, quote, unleashing of chaos and its power and the binding of chaos. Chief among the gifts of the soul will be the gift of religion. By religion, Jung does not mean membership in a church, but the attitude peculiar to a consciousness which has been changed by the experience of the numinosum. He means an encounter with the numinous in its most powerful and existential aspect. This gift, Jung reflects, is still to come, but it will become evident. I sat up for long nights and looked ahead at what was to come, and I shuddered. Unquote. I'll keep going for the moment. We shudder too when we survey the landscape of the sacred today and what is to come. Our world has grown so far from the sacred that any approach to this reality to us is experienced as terrifying. Not only has our resistance turned the sacred into a hostile force, but the sacred shows its negative face at this time. Rudolf Otto designated the holy as a mysterium tremendum et fascinans. Pages are difficult sometimes. It is a mystery that fascinates, but as tremendum, it evokes terror because it presents as an ominous, overwhelming power. In a secular age in which the only authority we acknowledge is our human will and desiring, the sacred hovers over us like a cloud. Due to our stance, it is the darkness of the sacred that eclipses its positive and creative elements, and this gives it the complexion of destructiveness. Hence, as the sacred returns, the psychological effect is that our world feels under threat, and there is indeed much that the sacred seeks to dismantle. It has been said that the divine mirrors the face that is turned toward it. And if we denounce the sacred, it will in turn adopt a foreboding attitude. As we run away, its pursuit of us will not be seen as loving, but we will experience its anger and wrath. We live in an age of terrorism, and this is not without significance to our spiritual situation. Our inner and outer lives have a certain similitude at this time, but few have pointed to this synchronicity because the prevailing voices are secular and do not look beyond appearances. It takes a symbolic attitude to read the signs of the times for their inward significance. Synchronicity is an acausal connecting principle. I am not saying that the spiritual climate is causing terrorism, only that there is a meaningful parallelism. Okay, I'm going to stop there.
What really comes to mind here is a broken mirror, a broken pot, a broken vessel. And I think the old adage of, 7 years bad luck with a broken mirror, I think it's not 7 years bad luck. I think there's a quality of overwhelm that happens because look at all of these new perspectives reflected in each mirror piece. And I think what happens is that overwhelm creates an avoidance and a chaos because of the disorder instead of, oh, look at all the golden connections I can make from all these new perspectives I can learn from by just cleaning it up. And this whole chaos and him, digging in to prepare for a long fight. I think he retreated into an either or in a way.
Yeah, he did.
Not the otherness included.
I think he didn't, at the time, he didn't see what is coming. We can see it today because we have the perspective of the 20th century. But when he was writing and having these experiences in 1913, 1914, the World War I was still in his immediate future, and he didn't know how bad it would be.
Well, and I think that's a great way to put it. I saw a cartoon yesterday that had It's a black and white photo, obviously AI, but it looks all grainy, like from the early 20th century, somewhere 1920s, 1930s, or 40s. But it's these three German soldiers running, right? And there's this T-Rex,
Mhm.
and it's running, and it has a rifle, and it has this, military helmet on. And someone said, "Look at this rare footage of the T-Rex, the last sighting of the T-Rex fighting in World War I." And then the first comment below it is, "That's that's not that's not accurate." And the next comment is, "Well, what do you mean?" "That's a Browning rifle, and that clearly didn't happen until World War II. This is footage from World War II with the T-Rex." But it's that image right there to me.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, look at the news.
Yeah. Oh wow, that sums it up, doesn't it? So
Yeah,
We have Gero here today, and he says, "Good morning
morning.
to you and me." And then he says, "Good to be here today. Work has been quite something. P.S. Can verify that the shipping sometimes works." I'm delighted to hear that. The shipping to our friend Roberta did not work, and here's the proof of it. It came back to me. Yeah. So this is some sort of nasty gram from the Portuguese uh, mailing authority
Uh,
saying ah, can't be received by the postal service, and I don't know why. And it was postmarked on February 21st, coming back. So I'll mention that to Roberta if she shows her face today. But her Christmas gift is here if she ever wishes to come back to the U.S., which she may not. Who knows? Um, and let's see. And Archiphanes says 3 hungry snakes will crawl along the roads of Europe, leaving behind ash and smoke. The time of peace will come, but the world will be written in blood. And when 2 fires go out, the third fire will be burn the ashes, according to Saint Gregory Rasputin.
well, that brings up the phoenix, which is a both and. That it has to disintegrate before it reemerges.
Yeah, right. Let's see if so there is a request here um, from someone who says, Tucker Turner says, "Hello, special request from a viewer. I know you just finished the Red Book segment in your videos. However, I would like to know if you have any videos of just the audio recording of the Red Books. And if not, I could just buy the audiobook." Okay, well, there are recordings, and I don't have time to search my Dropbox, but I can at least give you the Dropbox. Oh my goodness, what happened here? Because I just had it on my screen, and then let's see if I can get it back. Undo typing. Yep. All right. So I'm gonna put it in the chat for this is the Advanced Reading Group Dropbox. And there is another one momentarily. Un momento, s'il vous plaît. Let's see where did it go. There is the general Dropbox too. Uh, and I haven't looked at these in quite some time. I spent a lot of time creating them back in the day, but they are still there. I'm being charged for them. And so those are the drop boxes. And in there, you will find many treasures. I won't reveal what. You'll have
Yeah,
to you'll have to search for them. But in any case, I think you'll find many treasures there. And
it's funny. I got the message, your Dropbox has not been used in X amount of time. To keep it active, please visit. And I went in, and the first thing I saw was 15 30 by 42 construction document page images and for portfolio and resume stuff back from architecture. And I, I was like, it was like that was yesterday, but that was
yeah, we've moved
2000.
on.
Yeah, that was 2009.
Yeah. Yeah, life moves on, folks. So in any case, we're back here talking about the sacred returning. And I have no doubt that this is true, and I love this idea of the numinous because I've had quite well, I have numinous events occur to me every day, including this morning. Um, and so,
Well, it's interesting you say that because yesterday walking home right around dusk, um, usually you here I don't look at all animals as totems because we're in a zoo, you know, up in the mountain desert. But when you see bats, you usually see them in groups. And this one lone bat flew over, and I literally stopped walking and went like, that was weird. But I got home, and what does bat mean? And so open up the shamanic stuff to look at that, and it's just that glimmer of noticing the numinous.
yeah, you have to notice it. Um, you have to let it into your life and realize that it's there, and it surely is there if you pay any attention to it. Okay, reading on here. The sacred today is a complex field in which anger, violence, terrorism, and conflict are intermixed with redemption possibilities of love, hope, and transformation. The sacred is linked with war and revenge, fundamentalism, moribund doctrines, an epidemic of clerical sexual abuse, and loss of belief. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos, the sacred is returning. According to the philosopher Jacques Derrida, this is an urgent and pressing reality, and society needs to adjust itself to the new conditions. Quote, whatever side one takes in this debate about the return of the religious, one still must respond, and without waiting too long, unquote. Like Derrida, I don't think we have time to procrastinate, as the return of the sacred demands a response, no matter what our beliefs. When I think of the return of the sacred, images rise of floodwaters in the bed of the Todd River in Alice Springs, Australia, the town in which I grew up. Normally, the river is dry, but after storms, the Todd becomes a swirling torrent. But the waters that emerge are not pristine or clear. The floodwaters are dark, muddy, turbulent, and at its head there is a wall of sludge and debris. The waters that emerge later in this desert landscape are less murky, but there is always a sense that the floodwaters remain polluted. The rising sacred is like this river. Its waters are destined to replenish our lives, but there is an impurity at present. The sacred is a paradoxical and ambivalent reality associated with as much bad as good. I can see why many have become atheists in the face of this turbulence of violence, wrath, and terrorism. Many don't want to be associated with the sacred, seeing it as the source of evil, as Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens have argued. I understand their point of view, and through a certain lens, it does seem, as they claim, that the holy is what pollutes and gives a stench of decomposition to our lives. The new atheists reverse the religious view that the sacred is the source of goodness and light, and evil derives from us and our sinful distortions. Personally, I have always held both views, strange as it may seem. I believe the sacred is the source of goodness and light, but I understand that in our distorted time, the sacred is associated with the wall of sludge, debris, and darkness that comes ahead of the flood. Okay, comments here?
Yeah, that's still just either or thinking, and any ism is either or. Like Jacques Derrida is noted for deconstructivism, and you'd say modernism, postmodernism. The thing is, that's either or thinking, and that kind of thinking is actually the pollution. And so, to me, instead of explain, the best way to clear the muddy water, just leave it alone, experience it, and be discerning and aware. Don't be naive. Don't worry about are you naive or not. We try to have perspective. But I think this kind of thinking of reversing sacred and profane, for good and evil, it's still just tit for tat, back and forth. You're stuck in the yin yang, and you're not walking the curved path that is invisible,
Great.
because the line is just created by the contrast between the light and the dark. It's not actually a line, so it's an invisible path with a foot on either side. So I really think simple, this kind of thinking back and forth between good and evil, sacred and profane, it's easy to get stuck in it and take a side. And I find that when I indulge in that kind of thinking is itself the pollution. And instead of backing up and no bad weather, just bad wardrobe. And what can I do with it?
Like mine. Well,
That's different. I mean, you have a symbol there, and so there's a
yes.
whole story told by it, rather than some superficial affectation. It's basically a worn symbol, like a military
Yes.
uniform.
Yep. It also happens to be my school's uniform.
Oh, really?
Yeah, although teachers are not required to wear the uniform, but students are, and so it actually fits very well. Um,
Well, that makes it even more subtle too, because then the personal can be worn openly outside.
yeah, and as an individual, um, I think I'm entitled to mourn the loss of the country I knew. Um, I don't believe it exists anymore. Um, I was brought up in the 50s and 60s, and I think that country, which came together because, um, because of the opposites trying to force themselves upon us in World War I and World War II. At least in America, we had a Pax Americana that was very Pollyanna-ish especially in the 50s, and everything was hunky-dory. I think that we started to lose that uh, when we realized that the Cuban Missile Crisis was on, which affected me directly because my father was a naval officer assigned to Japan, and I was in Japan with him. And the next event the following year was the assassination of JFK. And I think that that sort of uncomplicated time uh, before, especially before the assassination of Kennedy, um, ended at that time. And we haven't been able to get it back. And meanwhile, um, we've had, the powers that be, both parties, um, trying to force things to happen one way or another, and we end up doing stupid things.
Well, yeah, and I mean, even you grew up in the 50s and 60s. I'm growing up in the 70s and the 80s. The the landscape, um, politically, informationally, um, I think what one of the primary issues is a lack of critical thinking throughout almost all time usually causes problems. And now with so much information all the time, people don't know how to pull their mouth away from the spigot.
Um,
And that everyone's being overwhelmed. Not everyone, but I think what happens is if you don't have a sense of personal sovereignty and ability to say either I don't believe you or just simply navigate the other way, you
yeah.
don't have to participate in every conflict you're invited to. Just
Yeah.
like, if
Well,
someone asks,
right.
yeah, I mean, someone
Well,
asks,
I had to giggle this morning when there's a report, I think it's on CNN, um, about American plans vis-a-vis China. And it seems that the new boys that are playing at the Pentagon have discovered the Western Pacific. And so there's this very detailed report about how the U.S. will focus on defending Taiwan, while we hope that the Europeans will defend, will resolve issues in Europe and the Middle East.
well,
And good
yeah,
luck with that. Yeah.
yeah, good luck with that because too, that not many people know that um, if we're defending Taiwan, um, that means we have to have an intimate allyship with Australia, and the whole environments are different. And so you will have like an internal civil war with your ally in a way. I mean, 10 years ago you wouldn't have, but now you get an us and them within trying to, if we have to defend Taiwan. Um,
So what are you saying about that? I don't
and
understand.
well, Australia has moved. America has moved more conservative, and Australia has moved more liberal. And it used to be in Australia, everything will kill you. So they had natural strength, but now they're kind of being suppressed in a way. And it's interesting, just the Australia and Canada seem to be similar. And just in terms of the percentage of demographic and um, who's in power. And at the same time, looking at let's defend over there from this alleged imminent dangerous force. Are we picking a fight that doesn't exist? I mean, should we deal with it from a business perspective um, and trade? Um, I kind of now feel the whole one of the differences is the military intervention is not a foregone conclusion. I don't think that has to happen. Now, that's my pesky idealism at work, but
Well, yeah, I mean, I have to point out a few realities here. Um, and those realities are that Australia only has 26 million people in it.
yeah,
And Canada,
it's like New York
uh,
City. It's like New York City or Tokyo. Just as
right. And Canada, last time I looked, was about 125 million, but I'll look right now again. It's 40 million in Canada. And
it's like they both have a lot of land that's not habitable. Canada because of cold, and Australia because of um, the bush.
yeah, and Taiwan's population is 23 million. Now, there's been this great fear that China would try to invade Taiwan. Uh, and that just is not going to happen. Not in the traditional sense of an invasion, anyhow, because the Taiwan Strait is 100 miles wide, and uh, so suggesting that there's going to be a traditional invasion of Taiwan is just ludicrous, keeping in mind that the English Channel is 26 miles wide, and look what it took to mount D-Day. Um, and and so I simply don't believe that. I think China has much bigger fish to fry than trying to control Taiwan right now.
I would agree. And also another, I think, reality historically that is, I think, necessary to bring up is, okay, 1865, 1861, 1862, who controls the sugar? Who controls the cotton? And then who controls the seed oil for industrial lubricant in World War II? And then who controls the oil? And then who controls the water? And now, Taiwan, who controls the microchips?
Yeah,
So,
very
and
important.
so I mean, if you just follow the money, ding, you don't have to go through all this,
Yeah.
actually chaos. You can see the gold nugget in the gold pan and throw all the iron oxide out.
Yeah.
Not even
So
touch it. And so I think,
Cherie
yeah, go ahead.
says, why does the United States need so many bases? How many bases does the U.S. have and why? Um, well, I don't know how many bases the U.S. has. The number that comes to mind is 129 countries where we have some sort of installation. I don't know how big they are. I can
Or
tell you.
any each,
Hmm?
right? And how many in each? Because
Yeah,
there's not one.
I can tell you that the military um, has not just discovered the Western Pacific. Okay, we've been paying attention to it for a long, long time, well before World War II, and for example, in my whole lifetime, a third, mind you, 1/3 of the U.S. Marine Corps has been deployed in Japan. Okay. With the exception of the time we were in Vietnam, and with the exception of Gulf War One, um, when the entire Marine Corps was lined up on the border of Kuwait, waiting to go in and take out Saddam Hussein. But in peacetime, a third of the Marine Corps is in Japan, and so we know a lot about defending the Western Pacific, a lot about it, and this article today, which was in the Washington Post. It said, secret Pentagon memo on China. Homeland has Heritage Foundation fingerprints. Well, the Heritage Foundation is a bunch of kindergartners who are, playing with toys they don't understand. And who
So I think
created
we could add
communism?
add to military bases. Okay, and how many embassies?
Yeah, I mean, presumably we have military bases in places where the host country is desirous of having U.S. military bases. And traditionally, um, for most of my life, the bases in Germany, I used to wonder, why the heck do I have to go to Vietnam when the army gets to go to Germany, right? And the reason at the time, which is the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, uh, was ostensibly because if the Americans were in Germany, um, we would take a lot of casualties if Russia uh, entered Germany. Okay, when there was an Eastern Europe, right?
But
Uh, if Russia came through the so-called Fulda Gap, which is a pass in the mountains of the German Alps, um, they could move theoretically. I mean, this was the way people talked about it. They could move 5,000 tanks to Madrid in 2 days. Okay. And so the idea was for the US to get blooded by that sort of an invasion, and therefore the US population would be up in arms and we'd come back and throw them out of Germany and Western Europe. That was the theory. And there's probably something still to that. I mean, another third of the Marine Corps is aimed at the west flank, or yeah, the left flank of NATO. Okay, defends the left flank of NATO. And uh, it's not in the Marine Corps isn't in Europe heavily, but uh, we do have equipment there.
that the gold nugget that to me comes up here is that's all predicated on the us and them thinking. And
Yeah,
then if we add the otherness included with the invisible path in between the dark and the light, and then what the gold nugget that came up, Reagan and Gorbachev, and you take down this wall, and then there's a mixing instead of a conflicting that, of course, creates conflict because there's a difference. And what do you have? Oh,
yeah, Roberta's here, so I just wanted to show her that I actually did send her gift. Let's see. Maybe I should take my cloaking off for a moment. Uh, okay, so here it is, addressed to you, Roberta. And then there's this lovely nasty gram from the Portuguese Postal Authority sending it back. Uh, and
art not allowed.
and so yeah. So anyway, I had a couple of my attempted Christmas gifts come back in the mail when I sent to Art Patterson also, unfortunately. Um, and so we live and learn. And so, Roberta, if you're ever in the United States, give me a call and I'll be happy to, or send me a note of an address and I'll be happy to send something to you in the U.S. But I guess I'm going to give up on foreign gifts at this point.
Well, it's funny. I put a book together a couple years ago, several years ago, that was a visual illustration of a poem about 16-page poem about the Garden of Eden.
Mhm.
And I did a handmade book and all this. And then I made a book that had photographs of it. And my Christmas stuff this year was that plus then the original text, because some people can't read my scripty hand glass pen calligraphy in the book. So to go together, well, often go awry. None of the original books with the poetry, so people could actually read the story, arrived. I mean, I ordered them in October. And so I now have, I think it's going to be for next year, because I have this stack, and your name's on one of them, a stack like of 10 of my part of it, but then the original poet's part of it is still out in the ether somewhere. And it was a small press book, so sourcing.
So yeah, meanwhile, Sheree says, Skip, could you please get in touch with Thomas Karat and those he interviews, Salt Cube Analytics? I would suggest for all to listen to his podcasts. Well, I'm sorry to say I just don't have the time right now to go further than just the 2 sessions that I do every week on Sunday and Wednesday. And
well, and I prioritize my time between this and my table. And that's, I mean, I don't even advertise on social media. I use Instagram, but it's more for local. I mean, I post a lot of cat pictures and stuff. I mean, so it's like the red laser was, high technology when it was invented, but now it's just a, cat toy.
Yeah. So Roberta, it would be great to have you here, and we normally, when we have guests, we kill the fatted calf. So you could be sure of hospitality here.
Yeah, definitely.
And
no, it would be excellent to have more people on the panel too. I mean, because we'll play tennis back and forth, but honestly, even when we differ, we're still, I don't know, we still drive the same points in a way.
Yeah.
Someone could hop in and spice it up, so we're not so. It's good, but I think if we could have some more, it would be
okay. Jordan, would you start reading with In Ion and continue through the second long quote? I'm going to take a brief break.
Okay. In Ion, Jung wrote that the erstwhile symbols no longer express what is now welling up from the unconscious as the end result of the development of Christian consciousness through the centuries. That is what the post-Christian spirit looks like. And he commented that it looks anything other than holy. He said the sacred had been suppressed for so long, it had become contaminated with murky contents that have washed through it during its exile in the unconscious. When it returns, it will do so as a torrent, unruly with anger and wrath. End to quote. The opening up of the unconscious always means the outbreak of intense spiritual suffering. It is as when fertile fields are exposed by the bursting of a dam to a raging torrent. Jung wrote like a prophet when he warned of the continued defilement of the sacred and its consequences in psyche and society. No wonder the Western world feels uneasy, for it does not know how much it plays into the hands of the uproarious underworld and what it has lost through the destruction of numinosities. It has lost its moral and spiritual values to a very dangerous degree. Its moral and spiritual tradition has collapsed and has left a worldwide disorientation and dissociation. This is what the Hebrew prophets said. If the sacred is not nurtured, the uproarious underworld will erupt, contaminating the world with the wrong kind of spirits, leading to a perilous situation. Our time, in quotes, our times have demonstrated what it means when the gates of the psychic underworld are thrown open. Jung said that nurturing the sacred has a therapeutic effect and acts like a bulwark against the destructive forces of the unconscious. Elsewhere, he personifies the numinous as a wrathful power. To quote, seeking revenge for the violence his reason has done to her, outraged nature only awaits the moment when the partition falls so as to overwhelm the conscious life with destruction. Man has been aware of this danger to the psyche since the earliest times. Even in the most primitive stages of culture, it was to arm himself against this threat and to heal the damage done that he developed religious and magical practices. This is why the medicine man is also the priest. He is the savior of the soul as well the body, and the religions are systems of healing for psychic illness. This is really wild. I had my teeth cleaned this last week, and it feels like they're naked.
Well, since I'm chewing here.
Yeah, I kept salivating. I'm like, this is like, I can't even keep. It's like radio. Try to not smack and.
Yeah, I will reveal what I'm eating. These are blocks. They're by the company that makes Cliff Bars. This particular flavor is Block Sours, which is strawberry lemonade. And if you eat two of these, it's equal to a cup of coffee. And so I've taken to these as my go-to coffee when I need it in school or here to wake me up. Anyway.
No, that's interesting.
So
I've been doing like 1 cup today, 2. A couple of days this week, I just didn't even make any coffee. I think it's because the diet and self-regulation of body doing what it's supposed to do. Like you said, you substitute something, you got to get rid of the habit first, but then all of a sudden it's a conscious choice. Am I going to make coffee or not?
Yeah. And so one of my colleagues who shares an office with me, I have 2 colleagues who share my office with me. One of them learned that he has diabetes this week. And so he was quite stunned and realizing that he has to give up a lot of stuff. I'm hopeful that since Debbie is and my allergy to meats has made me functionally a vegetarian, that this will not happen to me, but it's not beyond the realm of possibility. And so I'm being more fastidious about what I eat and when.
And I'm kind of the opposite from the carnivore perspective, but what I've realized, vegetarian and carnivore are in one sense both elimination diets in one sense. And what happens is if you eliminate carbs and sugar, then either way is a personal choice. And diabetes, it's interesting now, Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's are like type 2 and type 3 diabetes. And it's that the brain has too much sugar. It's not getting the fat and the cholesterol it needs produced by the liver. And then 95% of the total body serotonin is produced in the gut. And then it is integrated right in the lower, the top of the brainstem, right at the underside of the brain. And with too many carbs and sugar, your body goes into like pre-insulin prep. So, because it's getting so much sugar, you're not in ketosis. So you get lethargic and tired and brain foggy. But so it's interesting with you being more vegetarian.
Yeah.
From my perspective, it's the carbs and the sugar that really were the problem. And then other than that, I mean, I don't eat plants or fruit anymore other than alliums, garlic, onion, leek, but it's the elimination of the carbs mostly. And so I hope he is able to, or she is able to navigate that without, and you aren't able to navigate without getting that.
Okay, so Sheree is asking a couple of questions here, which are, I guess, worthwhile brief tangents. One is, what did Siddhartha see when he went out of his palace, and who did he see? Well, he saw poverty and he saw death, which he had been protected from when he was growing up. And we're talking about Siddhartha Gautama, who is known as the Buddha. And he decided to dedicate his life to understanding what was going on. And let's see, also why in India Hindu have so many gods? And the answer is we all have all those gods, but the Indians have had a few thousand years more than we have to recognize them as individual entities. And
well, and that's the whole concept of a fractal divine universe.
Yeah.
And whether you look at it as one big thing or many different sized things, nature itself in the universe is the divine.
Yeah.
So how many
it's all the divine. Okay. And Archiphanes has added peasants clearing the road of death. Yeah. Okay. Well, so as Don Juan DeMarco said in the movie by the same name, there are only 4 questions that matter. Of what is the soul made? How do you, or what is sacred? Of what is the spirit made? What is worth living for, and what is worth dying for? And the answer to all 4 questions is the same: only love. That's the answer.
well, and then you put also when did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop jumping? And the kind of thing. And it's I saw an interview with someone last week that said around 40 to 50 people stop jumping. And what's interesting, they stop lifting heavy stuff, and that causes the bone density loss. And so those 4 questions that you have there, that's for the inner bone loss, looking at what is the spirit made, of what is the soul made.
Yeah. So where did we get to here? Did
we
you
got
go
to
through
the end of page 36, the second longer quote?
Oh, okay.
I think it's worth repeating then to segue into the next.
So
this is
what the Hebrew prophet said. Have you read that?
Yes. And then the quote that ends up with, this is why the medicine man is also the priest He is the savior of the soul as well as the body, and religions are systems of healing for psychic illness.
Right on.
And yeah,
Okay. So carrying on then, religions were developed to propitiate the powers that early humanity sensed could overwhelm life and cause destruction. Although Christianity had refined its understanding of the sacred to emphasize its good and gentle aspects, the Jews had a different understanding of the divine, and ferocity was part of its character. Christianity believes that its revelation superseded the Jewish story, but it may be that it lost something integral when it rejected the God image of the Old Testament. In Exodus, Yahweh says to the Jews, I will send my terror before you and will throw into confusion all the people. In Proverbs, Psalms, and the prophetic writings, we see an emphasis on divine wrath, which shocks Christians because they lost touch with this aspect of the numinosum. Well, I would just say that the people of Myanmar um, got a good demonstration um, of the numinous in this sense with their 7.7 earthquake this week. And there's plenty out there that can still kill us. And I suppose somewhere in the universe there is um, a mini planet that's aimed right at us. I don't know when it'll get here, but when it does, we're cooked. You're muted, Jordan.
the image of that high-rise building with the pool on top just spilling
Yeah,
that
spilling the water. Yeah,
felt like an architectural water volcano.
yeah,
It's like nature just kind of spitting up like a baby. Um, it's and the buildings that came down because they weren't yet finished, so all the seismic constraints weren't in place completely. Um,
yeah.
Seismic design actually is a really good analogy, I think, to all this from a physics standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, ancient people, ancient human beings, had to explain their world, had to figure out a way to explain their world, and they all found ways. And today we can look at them as archaic practices, or we can understand what the ancients were talking about. As for me, I prefer to try to understand what the ancients were talking about because, um, I've had quite a number of numinous events which were not possible without synchronicity beyond words and way beyond words. And I've caught a couple of them on video, and you simply can't deny them when you look at them. Um, and so rather than deny them, why not accept them? Because everything that anybody ever talked about religion was all internal anyway. It's all within us.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Well, interesting too. I think the within us part conveys the arcana, which just means mystery or hidden.
yeah,
And what comes to mind is the shape of stones in the Inca walls that have withstood earthquakes for how long? Hundreds, thousands of years. And what's interesting is there are two types of stone shapes. One are rectangular. Okay, that's kind of normal. But then you get these polygonal ones, pentagons, hexagons, different shapes that are irregular. But if you take ancient maize, corn, and look at the shapes they used are particularly equivalent to the shapes of actual natural maize. So you buy corn in the grocery store, they're all, these regular little kernels, these pieces. But if you look at ancient historic maize, the shapes are just the same shapes as the walls. And what's interesting is them using that nature shape was a form of seismic design, because those walls haven't cracked, they hardly move, or they move properly so that they stay together. So they don't get, I think the metaphor or the analogy I'm driving to is when intense forces interact with any group, do they stay together or do they scatter?
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind is living in Japan, where of course there are fairly large earthquakes every 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, earthquakes that are quite noticeable. I mean, there are 10,000 earthquakes a year in Japan, but I'm talking about level 4 on the Richter scale and above every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, stuff bells kind of.
Yeah. And I was thinking about a product that I used to sell there called a crack inducer. You must know about crack inducers because when you pour concrete is quite brittle. And I never thought about this, but the reason sidewalks have these lines every 2.5, 3 feet is because they put an intentional crack in there, because the sidewalk will crack if the earth moves, even from reeving from ice or whatever it is. And so if you don't put a crack in there, if you don't build it in, um, you'll have a cracked up sidewalk, but it won't look pretty. Right?
Well, what's interesting is three things there. I mean, there are two kinds of cracks that are induced. The control joint, which is just scored with a tool across the top. And then the expansion joint, which is actually a separation of this, they're called stones, concrete stones, separation of one set of the stones. And you have the 1/2 inch, you'll see the black material or gray or whatever, where it goes all the way through, and then they pour another set after. What's interesting, if you put rebar in and stick it on the bottom of the concrete, it functions like a control joint. It's going to crack up and make two cracks on the top. So knowing how to reinforce it is one thing, but the joke with most engineers as well, there are two kinds of concrete: concrete that's cracked and concrete that's gonna crack.
Yeah, right.
And so what happens is, if you'll notice, most of those sidewalks and terraces, etc., porches, that you don't see big cracks, you'll notice that it's because the score lines, whether they're control joints or actually expansion joints that go all the way through, form squares. And what's interesting about that is concrete is actually, it doesn't dry, it cures. And it cures into a 3-dimensional hexagonal 6-sided lattice structure. So concrete's actually a crystal. And when it's curing, it gives off heat like up to 104, 106 degrees. So that's why you can pour it in the winter. I mean, if you just tarp it.
Or in the rain.
Or in the rain, because actually it's going to actually be exiting water called bleed water. And if you have too much bleed water, the top will spall, which means the flaky cracking. But it's rejecting the rain because it's ejecting its own water in the curing process. So concrete's an interest.
So anyway, crack inducers, just to finish my thought, it was a piece of plastic that you would put in the concrete with the intention that it would crack and break before the concrete would.
Right. What happens with that is you're intentionally designing the crack locations.
Right. That's the idea. And we sold a lot of that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, so I mean, you design the cracks by the shapes so that you don't see the cracks,
Yeah.
but that they crack underneath where you want them to. Because then you
Okay, but we're not getting into architecture here, so let's
about concrete.
let's go back to architecting religions here. So centuries before Christianity, the Greeks had a stark comprehension of the destructive face of the divine. This aspect showed itself when people turned away from the sacred and saw themselves as no longer obligated to express reverence to the mystery of life. This condition, which the Greeks called hubris, was severely punished by the gods. Greek drama and literature are replete with the terrifying wrath that the Olympian gods delivered to those who had spurned them. Perhaps it is time to reclaim these ancient heritages. Hebraism and Hellenism, which shaped Western culture, while important not to lose sight of the sacred as the source of illumination, which is the hope of Christianity, in a darkly turbulent time in which the sacred is returning from exile, we have to adjust ourselves to the paradoxical nature of divine reality. There is, however, an alternative way to view this, which does not hinge on speculations about the nature of the divine. Perhaps it is not so much that God becomes evil, but that the inward figure within our being, the soul, becomes malign when we fail to connect with the divine. The soul is the third thing between humanity and the divinity, and its job is to facilitate the connection between heaven and earth. When we neglect to attend to this relation, the soul, as the organ of meditation, turns awry and opposes our resistance. From where we stand, it looks as if God had taken up arms against us, but it is our soul that stares us down with wrath and terror. The soul stands in for the divine in this situation, and perhaps we make a miserable or we make a mistake if we assume that the fearsome aspect of the divine itself, we might we ought not assume that we can behold the face of the holy other or ascribe to it attributes that arise from the intermediary. The true nature of God remains an unfathomable mystery. Amen. The soul, says Rilke, is like a towering angel that stands over against us and yet offers transformation if we surrender to it. The soul is the beginning of terror, which we are barely able to endure, and we are awed because it severely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrible, and so I hold myself back and swallow the cry of a darkened sobbing that I suspect is what most of us do. We retreat from the darkness of the soul, swallow our anguish, and refuse engagement. In another poem, Rilke writes that whoever is beaten by the angel emerges strengthened. Winning is not what we should seek, but being defeated decisively by constantly greater beings is how we develop as spiritual beings. In the same years that Jung began his Red Book, 1913, 1914, an epic on the soul's eruption in modern times, Rilke was writing poetry on the annihilating and transformative forces of that eclipse the ego.
You know,
Go
the
ahead.
hubris to me is important here because
Sure.
hubris, if I just simplify an explanation, it's simply easily taunted, easily fooled. And from that perspective, there's a kind of a corrective or a nod to don't allow yourself to become tired from information overload. like ingesting too much news or chatter or gossip or whatever, because when you're tired, you battle demons that you long ago conquered. And so what happens is keeping people tired, too much information, is a way to promote any movement because they are more prone to power of suggestion, and because they're occupied battling internal demons, and it gives them a way to avoid that and act like it's not occurring instead of living consciously well and not knowing the outcome and living it into being. So I think that hubris there is, that's really applies to modern times too. I mean, how much news from what source, how much news from the same source repeatedly. I mean, you can groove yourself into a habit of, oh, I know the truth because I heard it on the internet or saw it, and there's a hubris there where we're kind of baby birds reaching up to be fed by mama or dad, and I think that it's important to feed ourselves and make choices about what we allow in. What is soul before in one of the paragraphs, that the portion of the soul that is the bulwark to protect you from the demons, as it were. And then you keep the demons in the engine. I mean, that's the gas exploding under the hood. You don't see these little micro destructions, these micro explosions. But if you're able to contain them and engage them, then they're useful. But I think the nod here with hubris is don't allow yourself to become tired so that you're not easily taunted or easily fooled. And then don't concern about easily taunted or fooled, because then that makes me sound self-righteous, like I never get fooled. I mean, I actually, when I'm proven wrong or I realize I'm wrong, I actually experience joy, because that's an opportunity not to cling to the past, but that's an opportunity to learn. I just molted something. I don't need to replace it. Something probably emerges rather than adds.
Yeah. Cherie asks, why is poetry so powerful? And I would have to say that it's the same reason that great art is powerful. And all creative things, creating an architectural structure, creating anything that you creating a beautiful dinner. If you're a chef, for a chef, that's as powerful as poetry. And the reason is that you do something. Okay, this is Skip's reason, so I don't claim this as everybody's reason. But Skip's reason is that if you do something that is unexpected and it allows the user, the audience of the work of art, be it a dinner or whatever, a chance to form around it, then it's talking to them, right? If you're concrete, if you're making Ritz crackers, the Ritz crackers are going to be exactly the same every time, right? There's nothing for your psyche to do with a Ritz cracker. Okay, you know what it tastes like, you know what it looks like. Everything is the same. But I can imagine a cracker that a great chef might create that might be surprising, maybe because of spices or because of the flour used or what have you. And poetry is like that. It uses simile and metaphor as a way to talk about something else, and yet it brings the mind, it focuses the mind on something. Okay, so I mean, I give you I can give you some examples in my own writing and my own poetry. I wrote a poem called Symphony one time, and it begins with these lines. I want to play you like a symphony. Uh, Draw a rosin bow across your silken breast with driving rhythms from the timpani. Well, everybody knows what I'm talking about without me being explicit and gross. Unless you're a child and you don't know what I'm talking about. But
Well, and a
um,
great example to me of my version of why poetry is so powerful. And um, it's because I think it's using words and text to paint a picture.
yeah,
And what's interesting is to paint a picture means to refer to the nonsensical, the inexplicable, the unexplainable, which is the experiential and the visual. So I think what's interesting is, regular language prose is just a sequence of words. But I think like you did, you just painted a picture, but then I feel like, I also see that as, oh, you're doing that on the stage in front of this whole audience because I see a cello and or do you see a violin? And
yeah,
at the same time, what's interesting is you're using other things to imply a specific thing. And what's interesting is I think then that can open it up to be more robust instead of just straight to the point, which, as you said, gross or explicit. It's just kind of more boring, and in a way,
yeah. I mean, it doesn't engage the imagination, let's say.
right? Which is
You know,
visual,
well, but it's not necessarily visual. It can be auditory in the sense of um, the opening lines of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony against Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, for example.
right?
There's quite a difference in the power of the two opening lines. But I mean, um, here's an opening paragraph from my novel, which is written under a pen name, but I'll just read the first few lines here. The black Toyota Crown with black smoke glass windows rolled through town like a primeval menace. Some people in the street turned away, pretending not to notice. Others bowed very low, as their ancestors had done for 1,000 years. The black car's pace was slow and quiet this morning, its color silhouetted against the patches of snow along the sides of the road. Longtime residents knew what kind of a day it would be from the demeanor of the car. This was a morning to visit the shrine and pray for anonymity. So you kind of get it from
Yeah,
that. Um, and I'm not going to read more, but in answer to the question of what, you know, why is poetry powerful? Just as, that was what, 7 lines of prose, but it also is quite powerful because um, it forces you to engage,
hmm
right? It forces you to engage. I think that's the significant thing about it.
well, and I'm in a I'm doing an 18-month long self-induced, no metaphor, no simile, no analogy, no poetry, unless I'm here or at my table. And what's interesting is I'm noticing how I used to use poetry as an embellishment rather than to make robust clarity. And I'm finding now using it less and like only for work here in my at my table.
Mhm.
I'm finding a more simplified version of my own voice. where I just experience it, I use it, I don't psychologize it, I don't explain it. It just is. And it's been really interesting because for the first month or two, I felt, wow, this is really freaking boring. And what it was is that there was kind of a dopamine hit of, oh, look how flowery my words are. I wasn't focused enough on the roots, too much on the flowers. And it's now I can, I'm coming to the end of that 18 months and it's like, okay, I can utilize it, but I just try to use one metaphor, analogy, simile, what have you, not where I used to. I think you said, speaking directly from the eras several years ago. I think what it was, I was thinking out loud. I was just continually painting more and more and more pictures, and it just confuses anyone else. And I haven't actually shared something that has merit or of value because I just poured out a bunch of stuff. Almost like, here, go walk on this wet concrete. I mean, that's no fun. So I think there was a simplification for me to shed what I grew up on, metaphor and poetry. And that's just how you spoke. And now it's less superficial and I'm less concerned about how I sound. And I don't know, it's refreshing now. But there was a self-induced stricture.
Yeah. So Cherie says, my first poem I learned was at the age of 5 years old, and that was the Omar Khayyam, the Rubaiyat. I memorized the words. It took many years to understand the full meaning. Sure. If you're 5 years old, you don't have enough experience to appreciate Omar Khayyam. That's for sure. But as you gain experience in life, then you understand the power of the moment. And it's like our friend Tim Holmes, whose paintings and sculpture are not directly representational, right? If you're an architect, you have to be pretty boring. You have to make a picture exactly what you're going to do so that somebody who's building the building can follow what it is you were talking about and believe in your structural calculations. But
I remember a client saying, well, what do you mean beauty is necessary? Beauty is an abstract. I went, oh, no. In this office, we dimension it every day. And I look back and it was like, wow, talk about hubris, talk about 29-year-old hubris. But it's funny because it was a combination of legal Spencer Tracy and making what we do less abstract and factual, when the reality is none of us knew where the initial idea came from in the first place, other than we did it. And so the joke in the office was, oh, time to threaten the muse. We need an idea quick.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to read just one more passage here. We can talk about it, and then we'll take up the rest of this essay next week. It's about a page long. There is something in the epidemic of religiously inspired terrorism that warrants close scrutiny. On the face of it, terrorism has nothing to do with the return of the sacred. In fact, it is a sign of the desacralization of the world and the misuse of religious ideas to serve ideological purposes. Secular commentators often offer explanations based on economics, politics, and cultural conditions. But there is a dimension of terrorism that is not being noticed. I do not mean that the jihadists are inspired by God, as they believe, but there is a symbolic element in their behavior that is important to understand. They're not the deliverers of divine justice or emissaries of the sacred, but carriers of a pathology that has its origins in the religious crisis of our time. There's something in terrorism, not because of their heinous ideology, but because of what lies behind it. Sounding like Jung, whom he did not acknowledge, Derrida wrote of the return of the religious and defined this as the coming of the other, where the other refers to everything that is different from the ego. The explosive force of the religious, he said, can interrupt history and tear history apart. In this interruption to the ordinary course of history, we have to be prepared for the best as for the worst, the one never coming without the possibility of the other. Derrida said religion would return with violence because it had been suppressed with violence. He spoke of religion rising like a tumor in society because so much that had been ignored about our relation to reality. The pressure builds up in the soul, which can explode at any point. Quote, um, religious resurgence imposes itself upon us to suggest the redoubling of a wave that appropriates even that to which, enfolding itself, it seems to be opposed. It gets carried away, sometimes in terror and terrorism, allying itself with the enemy, hospitable to the antigens, bearing away the other with itself. This resurgence grows and swells with the power of the adversary. Unquote. Originally associated with nihilistic postmodernism and still claiming to be an atheist, Derrida was driven to prophesy at the end of his life. How strange, he said, to find, quote, the return of the religious, not without relation to the return of radical evil, unquote. The post 9/11 celebrity atheists would argue that religion and evil are aspects of the same thing, but this is not Derrida's point. His point is that the religious impulse has been made evil by the conditions in which it has been violated. 2,000 years ago, the same point would have been framed in metaphysical terms. We have incurred God's wrath because of our betrayal of him. Many would reject this language today, and yet when we look at the terrorists, we see something of our own unknown face. Their evil expresses the darkness of what has been built up in the soul. Okay, Jordan.
Yeah, I think this whole idea of the other, especially the unseen of what supports you, what drives you, what is the spirit made of, what is the soul made of, where all this capital R Greek reason, masculine, mansplaining philosophy, Socrates, etc. Is I think it's important to notice what parts of the story are actually cut out, because Socrates' teacher was a woman, Aspasia. But why is that part of the story cut out? And so it's interesting here, I think, this coming back to the other, but that where's the return of the religious, not without relation to the return of radical evil. So turning back to worry and turning back to be afraid. And I think here what's interesting is, I mean, fear can be a driver. It's just an awareness that you need to do something. And being afraid is anxiety hijacking that legitimate fear. So I think the Derrida part, people over and over, and history repeating itself, they keep coming back to these dualistic two-part things when you really need the trinity of one, and not to be mesmerized or hypnotized by all the words, which goes back to why is poetry so powerful. It has fair few words. It's less than prose. And so you don't get a lot of words that don't have meat. So there's a lot of chaff in prose, I think, in regards to wheat.
Yeah. So Aristotle in a bottle, or Richard says Sufism compared to Christianity is how old? Aristotle. And Aristotle says Islam is very vast and very varying. Some parts are very much modern and have notions of equality of all, and even accepting LGBTQ. Why are there constant famines among in South Africa? Who has the controls of the power of media, war contractors, banks, Wall Street? This is a good question. Aristotle, Richard, Sufism is rooted in many ancient schools, but if we are talking about Islamic Sufism, then it is emerged in the 600 AD. Sufism is the typical mystical sense. In a typical mystical sense, is a lot older than Christianity. Islam itself emerged in 600 AD with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I'm not going to get into this discussion per se. Sufism is generally accepted as a mystical form of Islam, if I understand correctly. And it differs. Go ahead.
I think the one piece that stands out in that question to me, why are there so many famines in a particular area? Well, people are living where there is no food.
Yeah, right.
Move.
Yeah.
I don't want to go out in the middle of the desert and go, oh, I'm home. I'm going to sit down and wonder why I'm suffering. Well, and I think the famine piece, when you're tired, you battle demons you long ago conquered.
And it's, there's a lot of ignorance in the world. I mean, okay, here's my cane, which I frequently show. And I use this because, Moses hung out in the desert for 40 years. And it's no wonder that the young bucks of his party were getting a bit antsy, but the fact is that there was ignorance. Those people did not understand that what is modern Palestine and Israel was only a couple days march from where they were.
Yeah, it's almost like you quit when your destination is 3 millimeters over where you can't see across the ridge.
Yeah.
And that, to me, when I think it was Tony Robbins said, when you think you can't go on any further, go on. You're probably 3 millimeters from the finish.
Yeah.
Even if you can't see it. So there's a point of, it's always, if you can't describe it as a process, you really don't know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, so they got stranded like a mile from home. It's like, oh my God.
And Moses never did get to the promised land. By the way, the reference for this is Numbers 21, 4-9, if you haven't seen it. Numbers 21, 4-9. Okay, so Moses never got to the promised land because he was afraid to go another day into the desert. And somehow he finally got to a hill over the promised land and saw it, but he never entered it himself.
Well, it's like that Moses brings up that, oh, look, he had the first tablet. And and then Adam and Eve were the first people to not read the Apple service agreement. And their computer crashed after one BYTE. So
yeah. So anyway, okay. So next week we will continue with this essay by David Tacey. And the topic will be the West need to face up to the reality of darkness. Okay, and so we're starting to face up to it. We have faced up to it in the past, but in America, we typically do it kicking and screaming. So we didn't want to enter World War One. And so World War One went on for 3 years before the United States joined the war. And we didn't want to enter World War Two. And so World War Two went on for 2 years and a quarter before the United States was drawn into it. I have the sense that we are going to be drawn into another serious conflict here soon. The fact that we did the attack on the Houthis that was leaked inappropriately. Fortunately, somebody had common sense and didn't do anything with the leak until after the attack was over. But to be sitting here now and thinking that's that is not the wrong way to be, because there will be blowback from that, and it probably will be major.
well, I think to me, critical thinking is important to receive information slowly, think slowly, critically, and is it knowledge management? Is it propaganda? Is it truth? Is it true? Is it an air of truthfulness? Or is it manipulative tactics that are distracting you from what's right behind you so you don't turn around and see?
So, I think all those questions went through Jeff Greenberg's mind as he sat with the information, and he did not reveal it before the attack.
Is it beneficial? Is it necessary? And he's like, no, that's going to put people in harm's way.
Yeah, he had a lot of common sense there. But, the fact is, at what point, well, Clausewitz said it, war is diplomacy by other means. And we obviously have a new administration that thinks we're going to have a war someplace. And it's even in Project 2025, because now if you are turning 18 and signing up for the draft, you have to get an MOS, a military occupational specialty, at the same time. And having done that work at one point, I can say that you don't get a military occupational specialty without putting on a uniform. So in other times, we called that the draft.
Mhm.
So,
Well, and I think to me, I guess historically war is a foregone conclusion, but if we can get out of this adolescence, war is not a foregone conclusion. I mean, for example, I mean, I had someone who I was making leave the historic shops, and he was screaming at me right up in my face,
mhm.
and I did nothing. I just listened and listened and listened and let him exhaust himself, and then he said something absurd, and I kind of repeated it, and I'm like, oh, I stand corrected, but blah blah blah, and he's like, talking about cussing, but he left. Now that could have easily been a fight, conflict, destruction, but I just didn't respond, other than full silence.
Yeah,
That's unexpected. So I think historically, war is a foregone conclusion, but historically, the unknown is also a foregone conclusion. And my hope is that by other means, diplomacy by other means doesn't have to involve war. And
well, one can hope, but
and that's my pesky idealism coming back from
yeah,
youth.
but we did other means for many decades, and now our method for doing it has been destroyed in the form of USAID and the Institute for Peace, and other.
I think it's important to clarify people who don't know. U.S. aid sounds like farm aid, heavy metal rock and roll aid, some
Oh
kind of.
yeah,
And I think people need to get around what it sounds like, and it's really Agency for International Development. So it's something that needs to be looked at, because then that's it's that mission from the title is vague, but it's it's something that the U.S. has done across the world. So in a
yeah,
sense, U.S. aid becomes synonymous with foreign policy.
yeah.
But
It's very obvious that the way to stop the immigration problem on our southern border is to drop bags of money in the countries that are producing the people that want to get out of their own country. And
follow the money. I mean, that's
yeah,
what you go. It's always, no matter what they say. I'm like, well, don't look at the benefits. Look at who's profiting.
yeah,
And, um,
yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna hang up for this week. I'll see you next week.
sounds good. Have a good week.
Yep. Take care now, everybody. Bye bye.